Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with a quick video to take a first look at an exciting new addition to the DCS mod community. The OV-10 Bronco by Split Air, whose lead developer on the project is DCS. The OV-10 is another one of those aircraft that's right in my wheelhouse, and I hope a lot of you are going to enjoy it as well. If you know anything about the OV-10 and this channel, you'll know immediately what I mean. If you don't, well, stay tuned. So the first thing to note about the OV-10 is that it's pretty different from just about anything else you're likely to have flown in DCS. First of all, it's a twin-engine turboprop, which makes it pretty unique. Now, let's just get it started up, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. The start sequences are pretty standard for a turboprop, if you've flown any of those, though, in Microsoft Flight Simulator, for instance. First, we're going to turn on the battery. Then we are going to set the ignition switch to auto. And check, we're still not turning. Now we're going to engage the starter, and the prop is going to start to turn. We're going to watch the RPM dial, and it's going to stabilize at around 20% in the pre-ignition sequence. And once it's there, we're going to advance the condition lever, which is going to introduce fuel into the whole thing, and that is going to give us a start. And we will know that it started, but we'll know that it started by listening. But we'll actually be able to watch the RPMs come up. Now, very important as the RPMs build and it's clear that we have a good start, we are going to want to go back and disengage the starter, and we are going to want to turn on the generator. And then we're going to repeat the process for the right-hand prop. First, we're going to engage the starter. We're going to make sure the ignition switch is set to auto. Wait for it to get to 20%. And then we are going to put the condition lever to idle, and we're going to get the engine to start. Just watch the RPMs build there. And yes, it's catching as well. The developer has been at pains to point out that the electrical system is modeled, and that means that's why we have to be careful about turning on the generator, turning off the starter. If we don't, we'll drain the battery, and then we won't have it to do things like, turn on our gun sight. And yes, I have had that happen to me. All right, now we're putting the condition levers all the way forward so we get full RPMs at idle. And we are going to turn on the aforementioned gun sight. And maybe give ourselves a little bit of a panel light, and it looks like we have a good start. So without further ado, maybe we will get rolling here. And one thing to note about the OV-10 is, like the A4, it does not have nose wheel steering. It has a cast ring nose wheel, and it relies on differential braking. And yes, that will make it just as joyous trying to taxi the OV-10 as it does the A4, but if you work hard at it, you'll get used to it. One thing to note is that in the upper middle of your view there, just above the gun sight, there is actually a little meter that tells you the angle of the nose wheel, which comes in very handy. It's kind of too bad the A4 didn't have one of those. It probably would have made life a lot easier. Okay. So, you can hear our turboprops roaring as we're heading down to the runway here at Cabaletti. Now, as per usual, we are at Cabaletti, where that means we're going out to the iron bombing test range, which is just to the north of the airport here. And I'm just going to do a little bit of ordnance work to show you how to fire some rockets. We're going to fire Zunis today. We're going to drop some 500-pound bombs. And just take a look at how the Bronco does as an iron bomber. Well, I have managed to mess up my line up here on the runway just a little. What the heck? We'll take off on the left-hand side. Maybe we'll assume that we have a wingman or something. Our phantom wingman. Just not worth it trying to get two more lined up. So I'll stop trying. Okay. Now we're going to give it one notch of flap, which is what is recommended for takeoff. Final checks. We have fuel. And we're going to advance the throttle. Hear those Garretts kick in. We're going to release the brake. And we are off down the runway. Rotation is around 70. The nose comes up. And she comes off. And we raise the gear. We let the speed come up to about 120, where we will raise the flaps, and then we'll start raising the nose to try and keep the climb out speed at around 120. And this is typical in a turboprop. We actually will be able to get the nose up fairly high. The acceleration in the OV-10, like a lot of turboprops, not exactly eyeball flattening, but there is a lot of power there once it develops. So we've over pulled up a little bit. Lower the nose a little. We'll try to keep that climb out speed around the ideal of 120. So while we're climbing out, let's talk a little bit about the OV-10. The requirement for the OV-10 grew out of the early experience in Vietnam, where there was a clear need for an aircraft that could provide observation and maybe light attack, but which could fly slowly enough to see targets in the jungle, hang around for a long time, and be based close enough to forward troops so that it could spend most of that mission time actually over the troops. In 1963, the U.S. Army, Air Force, and Navy issued a joint statement of requirements for a new light reconnaissance aircraft, and the winner of the competition was North American Aerospace, later to become Rockwell Aerospace, with their OV-10 design. So before heading out to the range, maybe let's just take a little bit of a look at how this new design flies. The developer has been at pains to point out that he spent a lot of time on the EFM for the Bronco, so it does arrive with an EFM rather than an SFM. And the flight model does appear to be solid. The aircraft certainly has a feel to it. Both roll and pitch are pretty crisp, although you can definitely feel the weight in the aircraft. You do need to use rudder, although not very much rudder, which surprises me a little for the type of aircraft and the speed at which it flies. If there's anything about the flight model that I would want to quibble over, it's maybe that it's a little bit more stable than I think is probably realistic. There really isn't any inertia, I think, is the thing to the control surfaces. You begin to get movement as soon as you move the stick, and it stops as soon as you stop moving the stick, which I think I find in other aircraft with really highly developed flight models. There is some inertia. You do have to work to stay a little bit ahead of the aircraft, especially at lower speeds, which I'm not finding I'm having to do here, and I don't know how that grows out of the flight model, but maybe that's something for the developer to think about as the model continues to develop. So let's face it, it's a very early access model, and that's a detail. That's not something that we need to really focus on at this point, but that would be something that I would like to see continue to develop. So let's get fenced in here. Fencing in on the OV-10 is very easy. On the right-hand side, you activate the weapon stations. I have activated the outer winglet weapon stations, and those are the Zuni rockets today, and I have turned the master arm switch on. So that's all we have to do to be able to fire rockets. Now, the one thing I am going to do is I'm going to raise the sight. Turns out from my testing that rockets, both the Zunis and the 2.75s, fly a little bit above the natural sight position. So for the record, the center sight position appears to be 170 mils in the Bronco. That's where you put it if you want it to be where your machine gun rounds are going to go. But if you want it to be where your rockets are going to go, you raise it about 30 mils. So in terms of armament, the OV-10 arrives being able to carry Zuni rockets, 2.75-inch rockets in all of their varieties. And it also arrives being able to carry a variety of bombs. The 750-pound bomb, the Mark 82s, the Mark 83s, and the Mark 82 Snake Eyes. So there is some nice variety of weaponry, and it also will carry sidewinders if that's your thing. So we're just turning in here, going to make a run on the range. Now, one thing that you will notice about the OV-10, which is fantastic, is the amount of visibility out of the cockpit, which after all is what it was built for. So that comes as no surprise. And it's going to be very easy for us to find our target. We're at about 5,000 feet. which is probably, we don't need to get a lot higher than that in the Bronco. Really wasn't meant, it was definitely meant to fly below 10,000 feet. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is here after we finish our attack run. So I'm just pulling even with the target. I'm going to pull the nose up a little bit, do a nice wing over, and our standard attack, we're going to put the lift vector on the target. We're going to pull down until the sight is just below the target, and then we're going to ease it up. Just ease it up as we're flying in, and as always with rockets, we need to make sure we get good and close. And we're just going to keep the sight over the target as we close in. We're going to wait to get a lot closer than we think we ought to. And then we're just going to fire the rockets, and they're going to go straight into the middle of the target. And then we're going to advance the throttles, and off we go. And you'll notice that you can pull out at actually a fairly decent climb angle for quite some time. You can actually get back a fair bit of your altitude in the OV-10. It was designed, there you go, good runs with the rockets. I don't think we need to do any more work with the Zunis today. As I was saying, the OV-10 was designed to be fully aerobatic. It can handle 7 Gs positive and 3 Gs negative, so you don't have to be gentle with it at all. You can really throw it around, and so we'll take a little bit of a look at that later on. You really can get around in some fairly confined spaces with the Bronco, and it makes it kind of fun to fly too. So as I was saying, it really is kind of admirably designed for the role that it's in. It can cruise at about 250 knots. You can also slow down comfortably, as you've seen, to below 150, and with the huge canopy, you know, you get excellent visibility all around, and even over the side of the canopy, because the canopy actually extends, is wider than the fuselage, so you can actually look out and down, as you've already seen. Okay, we're back up to around 5,000 feet. We're just turning around and going to come over the target. Now this time we're actually going to do a dive bombing run. So, use the OV-10 slightly differently than I have used some of the other aircraft, just because of its dive characteristics. We're actually going to dive, put the center reticle right on the target, and then basically wait until we get down to the right altitude. We're going to find we're going to want to dive in around 40 degrees. We're going to want to release the bombs a little below 2,000 feet. If we time our pickle for just as we're going past 2,000 feet, we'll let go at around 1,700, which seems to mean that we've got the sight back to 170, so we'll keep the sight right in the middle, and we can actually get bombs right on target. So it couldn't be simpler if we do this right. So we got to get the sight up to the target and just hold on. Just hold on, another 1,000 feet to go. Uh-oh, we're slipping beyond the target. A little bit of forward pressure. All right. Okay, so we aimed a little bit long on that drop. We'll have to see what the target information tracking system says, but basically that was a question of not being trimmed properly. We didn't do a trim run today, so maybe that's not surprising. Need a little bit more forward trim to keep the, as the speed built up, we just started to drift past the target. So I'm giving it a couple of clicks of forward trim to hopefully make it a little easier. Yeah, looking at that, it looks like basically, well, we hit what we aimed at, basically. We aimed about 30 meters long and to the left, and that's what we hit. So the dive parameters, though, look pretty good. 42 degrees and around 1,600 feet. So I think we're moving in on exactly what kind of dive parameters we want, but let's go again and see if we can get a slightly more accurate drop. Now, the one thing you'll notice there is that I think I only got one bomb off, and that's because I just didn't hold the pickle button down long enough. We've got the bombs set to a half-second delay, but that does mean that you have to keep your finger on the pickle button, keep it depressed long enough to actually drop both of the bombs. So probably almost a second, which was longer than I did there. It was kind of only a momentary press, so I just dropped one of the bombs. Alright, here we go. We're coming around again. Once again, we're getting up nice and close to the target because we can see it down below there. And let's just roll it in. Get the lift vector onto the target. Pull it up. roll out. Just get lined up there. It's pretty sensitive in rudder. I may want to tune my rudder pedals a little. And we're just gotta wait. Whoops. There we go. Held the button down a little bit longer that time. As you can see, we're pretty close to the target when we're dropping the bombs. Now, we could probably calibrate the sight. It looks pretty good back there. We could probably calibrate the sight to drop from higher altitude and just move the sight down a little bit. I've experimented with that, but basically keep coming back to this method. I know 1,500, 2,000 feet. Well, there we go. Let's take a look. Those are pretty good drops, and as you can see, they're basically a 40-degree dive, and we dropped it around 1,500 feet. And we certainly got nice and close to the target. So I'm going to say that's really the way to drop bombs in the Bronco, at least for me. And 1,500 feet's pretty low. We probably could refine that and try to get it a little bit higher, but honestly, I think that in any realistic scenario for the Bronco, that's probably about where you're going to be engaging the enemy from. Because the other thing, did I mention, is that one of the principal weapons of the Bronco, we'll use it a little bit later on, is its machine guns. It has 4 basically 7.62 millimeter machine guns, but it has a ton of ammo, like 2,000 rounds for each one of those things. So you can be expecting to spend a lot of time suppressing enemy troops with your machine guns, and with 7.62 millimeter machine guns, you're not going to be doing that from any great altitude, I can tell you. Okay, let's take a look at a different target this time, because we've got lots of smoke and crud on the main target. So we'll go over to the 3 smaller circular targets, roll in and go looking for the first target. Now, I'm a little bit worried that I wasn't close enough to the target. I'm not sure my dive angle is quite as high. So we're going to see if that has how much of an impact that has on our accuracy here that we're developing. Once again, we just need to get the sight up to the target and wait. And we'll pull off and see how we did. It didn't look the same as the other target, the other bombing runs on the other target, so I'm a little bit worried. I think we dropped a little bit short. Let's take a look. Let's wait for the results to come up here. Yeah, not too good. Yeah, we dropped a bit short, and you can see, yeah, we were well under 40 degrees. We also dropped a little high, 1,800 feet or so. So, it's not hard, I think, to be precise in the Bronco, because it does fly pretty slowly, but we do have to kind of hit those dive parameters between 40 and 45 degrees, and we got to wait a little bit longer, got to get down well under 2,000 feet before we drop if we want to be accurate. Now, again, we could use a different sight picture if we wanted to use a different set of dive parameters, but I like this sight picture because it means I don't have to remember to adjust the sight. Seems to work pretty well, so let's go give it a try. This time we better snuggle up to the target a little bit more, make sure our dive's a little higher, and we just got to wait a fraction of a second longer before we release. Yeah, we're a little bit closer this time. Pull up, give ourselves even a little bit more room. And nice wing over. Give ourselves lots of time to get lined up. So we're going for the second target this time. Like the dive angle more this time, I think. Just got to remember to be patient and wait and wait and wait, and there. It's another one of those things where you gotta wait until you're ready to drop, and then you gotta wait just a little bit longer, I think. That looks pretty good. Let's see what the target information tracking system has to say. So overall, as you can tell, it's pretty easy to deploy ordnance with the OV-10. Yeah, look at that. Yes, we got a nice bracket. Yeah, we dropped at about 45 degrees, and we were right around 1,500 feet. So I'm going to say your ideal drop parameters are a 45-degree dive, dropping at 1,500 feet with the sight set at 170 mils. That's what I'm going to use as my standard drop for the OV-10. Maybe we can work on dropping a little higher, but for now I think that works pretty well. And again, I think that's a realistic attack profile for the OV-10. If anything, probably as I want to get better, I probably want to roll in from a lower altitude, so I'm giving enemy on the ground, less opportunity to see them coming. But I think those are probably the attack parameters that I'm probably going to want to end up using most of the time. Now, I will also point out that while you certainly can drop bombs from the OV-10, it really is meant as kind of a strafing platform. I suspect that most of the time, tactically, it was employed using rockets, either the 2.75s or the Zunis, when in fact it wasn't being used to just mark targets for other aircraft, but when it was engaging them itself, it was probably using rockets, and it was definitely using its machine gun. So let's go take a look at using this to strafe some hapless ground targets right now. So we're coming in at a much less steep dive angle, a much shallower dive angle. There is a convoy of trucks down there, although in classic DCS fashion, often you can't actually see them until you're quite a bit closer to them. So we may have to make some final adjustments here as we come in. There they are. Okay. As you can see, nice stable gun platform. We got all day to get lined up. And a very satisfying trail of bullets on the ground. But then the really exciting thing with the OV-10 is with its aerobatic qualities. We can pull up nice and hard and go into an actual rudder turn at the top here. Get ourselves turned around in a very tight area. Come right back down and start looking for targets again. No problem pulling out in time from a maneuver like that. And pull the power back. And start looking for targets. Now, if it is very sensitive to the rudder, I probably want to adjust my rudder sensitivity because of that. But it does also give you the capacity to actually aim those machine gun bullets. So, once again, build up some speed. Pull up. Wait until the speed drops back down below 150. And then we can just use the maneuverability here of the OV-10 to get around in a hurry. And come back down and find our targets again. Now again, we're obviously not going to do this if we've got a lot of radar-guided AAA around. But if we're basically dealing with insurgents, lightly armed ground forces, we can spend a lot of our time making their lives pretty darn miserable, I think. Once again, build up a little bit of speed, and you can see we can hold the speed even at a decent climb. And then once we want to turn around, we just pull up the nose, roll her over and step on the rudder, and she just comes around. Got lots of time to pick up our targets. We get some M113s down there. Let's see if we can do what damage we can do against an M113 with 30 caliber machine guns, basically. Oops, got a little bit of yaw going on. Well, not terribly successful against the M113, but we certainly got them thinking. So, well, I could do that all day, but you probably don't need to watch it all day. So, let's just turn around here one more time, take a look at what we have wrought on the range, as I like to do. This time, let's actually roll her right over and do the full split S. But as you can see, we pull back the power. We get ample time to finish the split S. No problem getting that done in time, and we could have actually done another attack out of the bottom of that if we really wanted to. So let's just fly over the range here, take a look at what we have done. I'm going to fly back and actually land in this video, which I don't often do because it's usually not a whole lot of excitement. But there is one other party trick that the OV-10 has that I want to show you, and that's its capacity to use thrust reverse, which means that it can get into some pretty small spaces, especially if it's lightly loaded. Now, speaking of being lightly loaded, that's one thing we should take care of. We are set to unlimited ammo, so our bombs and rockets keep replenishing themselves. So if we want to be lightly loaded on landing, we're going to need to jettison those stores. And again, that couldn't be simpler in the Bronco. It's a very basic aircraft. We just flip these switches down this time, and then we hit the jettison button and everything comes off. Okay, well, while we're flying back over to Copoletti, let's finish the story of the OV-10. I went to the trouble of looking up the history, so I feel like I got to include it somehow. The Bronco first flew in 1965. By 1968, it was in combat with the U.S. Marines in Vietnam. It was initially used primarily for reconnaissance and for forward air controller or FAC duties, which meant that basically it went into combat armed with white phosphorus rockets, really expecting to mark targets for the big boys. And that's a role that it would continue to play even until the first Gulf War for the Marines, because it wasn't actually finally retired until 1995. The U.S. Air Force also employed them extensively in the FAC role in Vietnam. At one point, even upgrading them to carry a laser designator so they could loiter and designate targets for the new laser-guided bombs that were being carried by the F-4 by the late 1960s and early 70s. As well, the Air Force also experimented with using them in a light attack configuration, but didn't use them extensively that way. It was the Navy, though, that went all in on the light attack role for the OV-10. In 1969, the Navy formed Light Attack Squadron 4, VAL-4, known as the Black Ponies, who actually were land-based, and over the 3 years that they were active in Vietnam, flew more sorties than any other fighter squadron in the Navy, supporting the Marines and the Navy's brown water riverine patrol squadrons. And they are the ones who really perfected the use of the Bronco in the light attack role. In fact, they're reasonably famous for that, and they actually have there is a website devoted to the history of the Black Ponies. And the Bronco arrives with no fewer than 4 different Black Pony VAL-4 liveries. So, about 300 odd Broncos were eventually produced. So it wasn't a widely produced aircraft. After its service with the U.S. forces, it did see service with a lot of other countries, and in fact there are actually some in service to this day in reconnaissance and counterinsurgency roles. So how are we going to use it in DCS, I guess is the real question. Well, I can see in solo missions, I can see using it in much the same way as the A-29. In fact, I've taken one of the missions that I made for the A-29. It was originally called Tucanos at Dawn, now I'm calling it Broncos at Dawn. And you can find it on my Discord server. Come and have a look. And it'll give you a flavor, probably, for what it would be like to fly an OV-10 on a counterinsurgency mission. Just a hint, you better be prepared to be pretty good at your canyon flying if you want to use it in that context. Basically, it's going to be good for any mission that needs an agile aircraft to fight lightly armed and armored ground troops, and that's where it's really going to shine. It will also be interesting to see if we can get some multiplayer scenarios where it can act as a FAC. Heaven knows targets are hard enough to spot in DCS. It might be useful to have somebody out there in an aircraft like the OV-10 marking target, finding and marking targets, since honestly that is one of the more difficult things to do in DCS, certainly in VR and certainly at higher resolution. So it might come in very handy in that role, I would say. So we're turning in for final on Coboletti here, and what I want to show you is taking a look at the runway down there. I am actually going to try and make the first turnoff on that runway on this landing, which when you look at it is not very far down that runway, but with the OV-10's thrust reverse capability, it's actually doable. So we're going to approach at around 120. Until we put down the final row of flaps, and then we're going to slow down to around 100. And we're probably going to try and aim for touchdown at around 70. I don't do a lot of stall landings. I don't do a lot of stall landings, period. I certainly don't do them in DCS, do them a bit more in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I will apologize in advance if I make a hash of this. But I really do think this is, like I said, one of the party tricks that you'll only be able to play in the OV-10, so it's worth taking a look at. So obviously there's no landing aids on the HUD. You just have to do this the old-fashioned way. Now, and again, with respect to the flight model, here's a point where full flaps, full gear, not really hearing it, not really feeling it in terms of buffeting or anything like that. I think maybe this is just a little optimistic in terms of how easy this aircraft would be to fly at this point in its flight envelope. I'm not exactly sure how that comes out of the flight model, but I do think that that's one of the things that I would find enjoyable if the flight model just got to feel a little bit more realistic. Now you can see that first taxiway not very far down this runway, so let's see if we can actually make the turnoff in time. Gonna have to touch down early. Alright, we are over the field, pulling back, and pulling back. Whoops, a little bit oops, nice bounce. A little bit higher descent rate than we really needed there, but let's fire on the reversers here, see how we can do it. Come on. Bite. Well, there we go. We had the first turn. It was not a pretty landing. Hope you all enjoyed that. But we did get her down and we did make the first taxiway. And so, you know, here's an interesting thing. For instance, sound modeling. I do fly a lot of turboprops. Yeah, kind of similar to the OV-10 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And one of the things that you will notice is when you go into thrust reverse, in any of those planes, reverse thrust does not sound the same as forward thrust. And there is a distinctive sort of wah to the propellers, which anybody who's flown in a turboprop and had them put on the thrust reverse on the runway will be familiar with. Don't really see it here. So again, that's probably another detail that the developers wanted to look at in terms of developing sort of a fully immersive sound model. So, but the basic conclusion today with the OV-10, it's a lot of fun. It's a great addition to the DCS stable. It's free. You should give it a try. I certainly expect to be paying more attention to it in the future, and I really wish the developers well. I am really glad that they have decided to take this on. Doing a DCS mod certainly is not for the faint of heart, and I think that they are owed some congratulations for having decided to start this project. I'm looking forward to see where it goes. As always, if you've liked the video, please do subscribe to the channel, like it, and suggest it to your friends. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.